ExpaTalk is a podcast run by Natasha Tynes and Zyad Rasheed, two journalists of Arab origin based in North America. The podcast focuses on issues related to Arab affairs and of interest to Arabs across the globe. We interview entrepreneurs, artists, luminaries, and those who are working on exciting endeavors. Join us on this adventure as we talk to those who inspire us and make us think differently about the world. The podcast streams live on YouTube and can be heard on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and SoundCloud. Hello and welcome to this episode of ExpaTalk. Hi, Natasha.
Hi, Zyad. How are you?
I'm very well, doing great. How's everything at your end?
Good. I'm excited about today's guest.
Yes, today is a very musical podcast. It's full of music and singing, and I'm very excited that our guest is joining us today from Spain. He's from Iraq, from Jordan. He's from the international world. He's a very international person. Our guest today is Layth Sidiq. And Natasha, can you tell us just briefly, how do you know Layth Sidiq? I've known him from the social media, and I've been following him, but I know that you have a personal story and personal attachment to Layth Sidiq. Can you tell us the story?
Yeah, it's back in the days, like over 20 years ago. Now everyone knows my age, but I used to play the violin and in Jordan at the National Music Conservatory, and a conductor of the orchestra where I used to play was we used to call him Ustaz Muhammad Sultaiq, and he used to come to the practice with his, I think he was 4 or 5 years old son, and that was Layth when he was like 4 or 5 years old. And we all be playing the violin, and Layth would stand in front of us and he would wave his arms as if he's a conductor. And he was like only like 5 years old, and we all look at him and laugh like look. And then now, I think only last year, someone showed me something on Instagram, and I was like, oh my God, that's Layth, the boy his dad used to bring to the orchestra. And then now he's like a famous violinist, award-winning. He just was hired to conduct the Arab Music Orchestra in New York. His Instagram videos and YouTube videos are wonderful. I just go through his feed and listen to them. Wonderful voice, like amazing talent, and he just took me back to those days. And I thought of this, and it's like he would be an amazing guest on our podcast because he represents everything we in this podcast talk about, which is people who inspire us, people of Arab origin, people who talk about identity. So I'm really, really excited to chat with them today.
Okay, so that's excellent. By the time you fix your microphone and connect your blue snowball microphone, let me give our dear audience a brief idea about Layth Sidiq and who he is. Layth is an award-winning violinist, a composer, educator, and the current artistic director of the New York Arabic Orchestra and the Center for Arabic Culture's Youth Orchestra program. He has toured the world and shared the stage with major artists such as Simon Shaheen, Danilo Perez, Javier Limon, and Dejohnette. as well as performing in prestigious venues like the London Jazz Festival, the Boston Symphony Hall, WOMEX Expo, Panama Jazz Festival, and more. He is featured on multiple award-winning albums, and his first record, Son of Tigris, was premiered at the Montreal Jazz Festival in 2016 here in Canada. In 2018, Layth won the second place at the Seifert International Jazz Violin Competition as the first ever Arab to ever participate, and he was also recently awarded Best International Artist at the 2020 Boston Music Awards. He was the director of the Tufts Arab Music Ensemble for 4 years, and he's a current guest faculty member at the Carnegie Hall's Music Educators Workshop. Layth is an in demand violinist, composer, and educator in the United States and abroad. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, please welcome our guest for today, Mr. Layth Sidiq. Hello, Layth.
Hi, Zyad. Hi, Natasha.
Hi, good to see you today.
Good to see you
Layth,
more.
I think the best thing to start a musical podcast is by music. So before we go further into details and talk more about you and about your fabulous work, let's listen to some music, please. Can
Absolutely.
you?
I'm gonna be sharing one of my own pieces from the album you mentioned, Son of Tigris, where I performed it at the Montreal Jazz Festival. The piece is
Yes,
called Unshakable Roots. And I think as artists who kind of have made our career abroad, away from home, this piece for me reminds me of those unshakable roots of my Arab identity and what they mean to me as an artist today. So here is Unshakable
fantastic.
Roots.
Fantastic. The stage is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you.
That's
Shukran.
fabulous. Thank you very much, Layth. Thank you. That's a very beautiful opening for the show today. So,
Thank you.
Layth, let's talk about the source. It seems you have absorbed music at a very young age, and thanks to your parents, who are musical as well by profession and by education. Can you just tell us briefly and quickly the journey or the formation of the
Mm.
musical character of Layth Sidiq? How did you grasp and obtain and absorbed all that music and love to music and art to make you the man that we see today?
Obviously, I consider myself to be really lucky to have grown up in such a musical home. And that, of course, is thanks to my parents, but even more so to their open-mindedness that has opened our house doors to guests from all over the world. In the conservatory as well in Amman, where there were always musicians coming from different parts of the world who would visit and perform concerts. So I was always that little kid, like Natasha mentioned in the beginning, that I'm always in the corner,
Yes.
listening, trying to absorb things, whether it's Western classical music, Arabic music from all parts of the Arab world, from Egypt, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon.
Yes.
Plus, having the opportunity to travel, I think as a kid with my father, they were always taking us with them everywhere they went. And that has really exposed me to an incredible amount of musical resources as a young kid. So learning the instrument, the violin, at the age of 4, it's a very young age to learn an instrument. But because the environment was so supportive, I never felt really pushed into it. I felt like I was allowed to enter into it somehow. So it was a beautiful way to have that childhood, and I never felt that stereotype of as a kid I wanted to play sports, or I wanted to do other things, or go play video games. I think from a young age I was passionate about music, and I chose it as a career. It wasn't chosen for me.
That's fabulous. And the start was from Amman or from Baghdad, where you were born?
So I was born in Baghdad, of course, but my whole life I grew up in Amman since I was a year old.
Yes.
So I am a Jordanian outside of the house in my childhood, my friends, the conservatory, my career, my work. But when we're inside our home, it's a very Iraqi house. So it's whether it's the food, the dialect, the jokes, what's on TV, which teams to support, football teams, for example, these kind of things. Yes. So I have this beautiful two worlds, really. I mean,
Of course, it enriches your identity, your musical identity.
Very lucky to have been brought up in such an environment.
Yeah, that's fabulous. So talking about the musical identity and music for someone who grew up between two different countries and now moving around in the world, how does Arabic music serve as an identity for expats and immigrants, and how do they embrace it and identify with it when they live in diaspora or as an expat or in countries in which they immigrate?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, as an Arab artist, I grew up in Jordan. That's where I learned how to play the violin. What music means to me was in Jordan. At the conservatory in Amman, I was mostly learning Western classical Western European styles of music, which are really the foundation of the instrument, of the violin itself. And I used to travel, do concerts. I never really thought of Arabic music at that time as an identity, because I was trying to absorb other sounds, other identities from around the world. But it was only when I actually left the Middle East and I went to continue my studies in the UK and finally in the US, in Boston specifically, is where I realized from my interactions with friends and colleagues, when they tell me, wow, you come from such a beautiful place that has such a unique history, musical culture and sound. And up until then, I had never thought about it, to be honest with you. I was trying to be somebody I'm not. I was trying to be a European violinist playing European music. Yes. But then something clicked in me and I said, how come I've never really absorbed or approached our music, our identity? Who's Layth as an Arab artist? That's when the journey really began. Personally for me, this is 12 years ago now, so it's not that long ago. When I thought to myself that, yes, I have to really relearn who I am as a person in many ways. And this journey has taken me to, become the artistic director of the New York Arabic Orchestra, has reaffirmed in me a certain role I play in my community, in our society. Boston is a great city. but also Boston is a city that has a lot of immigrants, expats, people who come from, whether it's by choice or maybe they're forced to leave homes because of war and conflict. And many of those people find comfort in the arts. They find comfort in music. And I found that the way to bring those communities together in one space and to rejoice in who we are, to not forget who we are, is through music. Another thing that I do, part of my, my career, my work, is I direct the Center for Arabic Culture's Youth Orchestra program in Boston, which is a program for young students who are from Arab backgrounds, not necessarily, but they could be from Arab backgrounds, who are second, third, or fourth generation sometimes. So for them, the Arab identity is very far for them. But their parents want them to have the feeling of what that means. So the program is centered around that idea. And, it does not mean anyways that you are trying to create artists that are only believe in their own Arab identity, but to remind them that that's an important part of who they are and where their families are from, because that helps you become a more independent person and have a very strong sense of who you are, so you can decide who you want to become. It gives you a better idea about that. So that's been an important part of my journey as an educator and as a musician.
Fabulous. And maybe this brings us to the next question that's in my mind, which is musicians as role models or activists in the community. How do you promote that? How do you become an influencer or a role model for people and the younger generations who come to learn from you and know you through your music and know the music and their culture and backgrounds through you? How does that reciprocate?
So I think as musicians who are used to the stage, someone like me, my first experience was I was 8 maybe or 9 years old when I had a big concert where I was on stage. You are brought up with that sense of being, unfortunately, very self-centered, meaning that you're waiting for that applause at the end of you want to be the spotlight. You want to be in the one that people clap for. So it's easy to be brought up in a way that you're an entertainer as a musician, right? That your role is to entertain the audience. And oftentimes you forget that as a musician, there are so many more ways you can be involved in music that doesn't have to be on stage specifically. And we learned this actually this past year in the pandemic, and that suddenly, as artists, events and stages were closed immediately. I mean, without any prior notice, closed, done. So
and musicians started to perform from homes and performing from closed spaces. Yeah.
So you find ways to use music as a different tool, not just as a performer, but perhaps as an educator. So this is something I learned actually during my master's program at the Berklee Global Jazz Institute, which is a 1-year program that really brings out that same idea of identity we talked about. It's centered around the idea of jazz as a philosophy, as a concept as well, and how you can find yourself as an Arab artist, for example, within jazz, which is a style of music that could seem distant. Basically, it's born out of the US, but it also has connections around the world. And during that year, we would go on all these kind of social trips where we used to go to prisons to perform for the inmates there. We would go to homes of the elderly. We would also perform for them and interact with people. And you see how music can really touch somebody's life beyond just that moment of applause. And this triggered something in me, that how you can use music as a tool for positive social change. And me and many other people, my friends, colleagues, every time we perform now in a concert, in a tour, let's say we go to Poland or go to the UK, we try to find opportunities in that community where we could visit a place, a school, a center, and give a musical workshop free of charge. Because music doesn't have to be an elitist thing, only available for those who can afford it or can pay for it, but it should be available to all. So it's a way of giving back. And my most precious experience, I think, was when I collaborated with the Kayani Foundation. It's a foundation in Lebanon, in the Bekaa Valley, that has schools for Syrian refugees. And I went 2.5, 3 years ago for a few days, and I worked with the students there. And we worked on music, but I worked specifically on songs from Syria, because I wanted to reaffirm the identity of who these kids are, where they're from, because it can be easily taken away from them now that they are away from home.
Yes.
Even more so to this, I got some support from Berklee College of Music and Tufts University, where I was a faculty member, to get some sponsorship to buy percussion instruments made by Syrian makers to support local business and give the instruments to the students in those schools. So a much bigger role that you could play as an artist, as a musician, besides just being on stage, which is great. It's the most amazing feeling being on stage, but to affect somebody's life and to see them find a certain kind of purpose and giving back to the community, I think is even more special, and it's something that I plan to continue on doing moving forward.
And it seems that you're always in the move, just like music. Music doesn't have a home or country, it's a universal thing. And you, as a musician yourself, have become a universal citizen, someone who moves around in the world a lot and don't even have a specific location. Your location is where your music is, your work is, and your family is. How is your family coping with that? Are they willing to do it the same way you're doing it? Do they have the same passion, or you hear some whining here and there about it?
No, I think, of course, with the ease of travel nowadays, you're not, well, again, besides this, last year didn't happen. Let's just say that it's canceled.
Okay.
2020 is canceled.
Yeah, just delete it from our lives.
Delete it. Besides that, travel is easy nowadays to visit family, visit people. Finding work opportunities closer to home is always a great thing.
Yes.
And I mean, with a click, you can be on see somebody's face and talk to them for an hour or so. So there's
Like
always
we right
ways,
now.
like us right now. So there's ways
Yeah.
to make it work. I think you don't really need to be in one place all the time. It's to work, to be happy, to make a career for yourself. Just follow where the priorities are. And I think what this last year taught us is that priorities, for me at least, lies within those personal connections, relationships, family. This has transformed really the way I think about life.
Yeah. Layth, before we switch gear to social media, and maybe now it's Natasha's turn to ask you questions in that regard, how about we take a break and listen to some music? Anything specific
Sure.
in mind? Yeah, thank
Yeah,
you.
I think that because also we were talking about that idea of moving away from home, part of the
Yes.
same album, there's one of the pieces called Eastern Waves.
Okay.
It talks about I think, universal theme of immigration. It doesn't have to be specifically about Arabs, or it doesn't have to be a darker concept of fleeing or something. It could be all of us choose a moment in our life to go somewhere else, leaving behind family, friends, and what that emotional journey feels like to us. So this
Yeah.
piece is really a tribute to that idea of leaving home.
Thank you. We're waiting to listen.
Yeah.
Woohoo!
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Layth. So now I think it's my friend's Natasha's turn to ask you some questions regarding social media, and I'll be listening too. So, Natasha, please go ahead. She's muted. Okay, go ahead.
Can you hear? All right. So, Layth, as I mentioned at the beginning of the show, I found out about your career through social media, through Instagram, and I noticed you're really good with using social media, and actually you're using social media for the good. And we've seen many people misuse your social media, and it's like for political fights and other. But the way you've been doing it is very inspiring. So I want to know more about what led you to use this media in this social way, and did it actually lead to more career opportunities for you? So, and if you can give advice to other artists how they use social media to advance their career.
Absolutely. Natasha, I was really, at some point in my life, I was against, not against, maybe I didn't understand what Facebook was, for example, how to use these things. I would never post, I would just not even open it. And friends of mine at the time would tell me, Layth, you have to use it. It's a great way to showcase your work and how you do it and what you do and so on, so. And so gradually I was starting to post some things. Maybe it was irrelevant stuff like what I'm traveling, or here I am going to Amsterdam, or whatever, all these kind of things. But then just a year ago, exactly a bit more than a year ago, right before the pandemic started, I remember I posted one video, which was the melody of the Godfather theme. I played it once as it is, and a second time with some Arabic ornamentation in the way I'm playing. And I asked people to compare the difference. It was just an experiment, and people really liked it. I saw that, there was some engagement on Instagram that I haven't seen before yet on my page. So I thought, okay, it's a nice idea. Let me continue with it. So because, of course, we had a lot more time on our hands with everything being canceled during the pandemic, I put a schedule, basically what to record, what pieces to record, and on what days to post them. So almost like a full-time job in many ways, right? I had a schedule. I followed that schedule pretty vigorously, knowing exactly when I'm going to do things. And the more I did it, the more consistent I was with what I was posting, the more engagement I got, the more people I met on my page. But at some point, Natasha, I broke that sequence. I posted something different. It wasn't the violin. It wasn't to do with any of the Arabic music or this idea. And suddenly, look, everything fell. It wasn't the same amount of engagement. And I realized that, okay, so what I'm doing here is I am basically conditioning my page to attract a certain kind of audience. What is that audience? Who is that audience? What do they like to listen to? And from that moment on, I realized that, okay, my audience likes to listen to the violin. They like listening to Arabic music, perhaps certain contemporary styles as well, and educational content to learn more about maqamat, about musical modes, rhythms, and so on. So I started to focus on that a bit more. And from a year and a half ago until now, I think that the following base on my Instagram specifically grew to over 20,000 kind of followers during that time. And I don't even like the word followers, because I see them as just friends who like to listen to this music, and I enjoy sharing it with them. And it's such a beautiful tool to, yes, meet people and network with other artists. I met so many artists that I wanted to work with for so long, but because of the distance, it was hard to meet in the same place. But social media gave us a platform to do that and to create wonderful collaborations. And as I mentioned, in that, even in job applications today, sometimes when you look at people, when you fill up a form online, one of the blocks there, the questions is, can you put your social media handle? What's your Instagram link, your Facebook link, your Twitter handle? Because people want to look at how you portray yourself as an artist. What is your philosophy as an artist? So it's so important to really build that and work on it to market yourself and create your audience instead of them creating you.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. So did you get any new like jobs or gigs through your social media platforms? Was that helpful in advancing your career?
100%. Through social media, I got to connect with a fantastic violin string company called Tomastic in Feld. And I'm endorsed by the company, and they're such a phenomenal string makers. I've been using their strings for a very long time. So that was a great collaboration. Of course, social media really helped with that. I got to meet the team from Anghami, the great the social media platform for the music platform, and we did a collaboration together with the artist Rola Azar. We did a song Abrozana. So that's again a wonderful connection to a great musical entity in the Middle East. So things like this that just came out by people accidentally opening a link, seeing a link, checking something, and they say, "Oh, who's this artist? Why do they like? How are they playing Arabic music? They look Irish. I'm gonna check out. I will check. I will go in a bit more and see who that person really is." So it creates an interesting story about who you are. And what I've always done, and I will continue to do, is sometimes people reach out to me on Instagram saying, "Layth, I'm struggling with, for example, my violin teacher, or I can't find a solution to how to play this phrase, or how can I find a good instrument, for example." And many of the times I try my best to respond to everybody as much as possible and to also help. So, it's use the term influencer. Now, these days, sometimes influencers, you see them buying products like, I don't know, makeup or shampoo for men, or like selling products and so on, which I guess is a way to sell things. But how can you use the term influencer to influence in more artistic, educational content that really supports and helps people in their careers and their lives? So this is what I've kind of been focusing on in the past year or so.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. So another question, it's a bit different than the social media, which is when I grew up, learning music at the same place where you grew up, and you mentioned that we were taught classical music, and classical music was the thing that everyone taught us. So what is the future of classical music, not only in the Arab world, but in general? Like, I know here in the US, many classical music stations are shutting down. People are not listening to classical music. Let alone in the Arab world. Do you think we still need to teach, people classical music, or just it's going to become extinct?
So one of the big reasons I think why the forms of classical music around the world are being listened to less by people is because it's like cooking a great meal. It needs time to be ready, right? A piece of music, you listen to Kulthum, for example, or you listen to a Mozart symphony, right? It's a 25 to 30 minute piece. And to really appreciate the whole thing, you have to sit through 30 minutes. Now, I doubt people nowadays with the attention span, you now see videos on YouTube that are 30 seconds long, 40 seconds long, maximum.
Yeah.
And even then, you get bored quickly, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So this is really part of the reason why it's hard to get people engaged in classical music, because we have to sit through a long piece of music and understand how to appreciate it. So that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to make classical music shorter or make the pieces shorter, but how to approach this new audience from a different angle. And in the case of kind of what I've been doing is to use the music or elements of this music and engage it from more personal things. So I have one of the pieces that I shared recently, for example. It's called Longing, or I called it Longing or Shawq. And I tried to tell a story in that piece about how when I have 2 days away from my violin, that feeling of longing from the instrument, what it creates in that moment when I come back to it. So when you tell a short, simple story that people can visualize and see, immediately it becomes relevant to them, what that is. And also, when you say classical music, when you talk about Western classical music or European classical music, those are pieces written 300 years ago. Not all of them, of course, we have many in the last centuries, but many of them are irrelevant to how we're living today. right? So so encouraging composers to write pieces today, encouraging people to learn about this music and to teach the audience. There was, I'm forgetting which Egyptian composer said this, whether it's Riyad al-Sumbati or Muhammad al-Qasabchi, one of the two, said that oftentimes when we write music, we try to go down to our audience, to reach to them. But why don't we switch that? Why don't we pull them up with us, with that music, right? So that shift of mentality is really vital and important. And finally, the icing on the top is the education, right? Is teaching students how to appreciate music. You don't want to teach, and this is a flaw sometimes in education, where when I studied math in school, or biology, or any of the subjects that I don't know anything about today, I felt like we were being taught these subjects to become experts in them, not to appreciate them or to enjoy them.
Yes.
And this is a big issue, in that music oftentimes, especially by individual private teachers, is taught in a way that you must become a professional musician. You must play it at the top, highest level, but not to love what you're doing or to have a passion for it. I would love to teach a classroom of 30 kids, knowing that 27 of them will become doctors, engineers, physicians, sports, but those same people will attend concerts and they will support artists because they know how valuable music was in their life. So this is how you change and shift a society, and it starts from the very beginning. It starts from education.
Yes. Layth, I have a request now, and I think it's a good time for another short break. But this is a different request. I hope it doesn't come as a surprise for you. I know you sing, and you have a wonderful voice too. So, how about, if you don't mind, singing something for us?
Sure, of course. I know I always say I'm not a vocalist. I was never trained as a vocalist, but it is really an extension of expression for me. So I never really sing a lot in my performances. Usually the violin is my main instrument, but every now and then the voice reaches people in a different way. Perhaps it's the lyrics, it's the meaning, or just the nature of the human voice. It just reaches deeper. So I'll sing just a segment of an Iraqi song called Ala Shawati Dijla, On the Banks of Tigris, one of my most favorite melodies ever.
I love that one. That's a good choice.
Here we go. على شواطئ دجلة مر على شواطئ دجلة مر يا منيتي وقت الفجر صبح وعصر على شواطئ دجلة مر على شواطئ دجلة مر يا منيتي وقت الفجر صبح وعصر شوف الطبيعة تزهي بديعة شوف الطبيعة تزهي بديعة ليلة ربيع يضوي البدر يضوي البدر على شاطئ دجلة مر على شاطئ دجلة مر يا منيتي وقت الفجر صبح وعصر.
Ooh. That's
Thank you.
wonderful.
Wow, that's very nice. I have tears in my eyes. I have tears. Oh my
Thank
god.
He
you.
keeps surprising us, right? Okay, so some of the audiences and one of the I find them maybe very it's a very important I think for you. I don't know if you read it or not. It's from Nuhad Matalka.
Miss Nuhad.
She was your teacher in second grade, and she noticed how you loved music, and she says she encouraged you to play it at school
Yeah.
party.
Yeah, I remember now. Miss Nuhad, if you're watching, يعني إذا عم بتحضري I'm going to switch to Arabic just for Miss Nuhad.
She is watching, yes.
بدي أشكرك عن جد يعني أنا ما بنسى الأساتذة اللي كانوا ساهموا بحياتي ومشواري الفني والتعليم يعني وخاصة بالمدرسة المعمدانية يعني عن جد كانت أيام كتير حلوة وبشكرك من كل قلبي على يعني على الطفولة وعلى الصفوف اللي كانت معك. كنت كتير إنسانة لطيفة وحنونة عن جد بشكرك. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. That's very appreciative. Thank you very much, Layth. Very nice of you. There's a question from Karim Ayoub. He's asking a great interview. Do you recommend musicians to master more than one instrument?
So, you know, it's really a full-time job if you're playing one instrument. It takes a lot of years. I mean, I started at the age of 4. I'm 29 now. And I still feel there is so much left for me to work on, to improve, to get better at. So, however, learning a different instrument can give you a different perspective sometimes. So when I was at the school, in the Baptist school, my father enrolled me at the school band there under Miss Barbara Johnson, who was running a school band, a wind and woodwind band. And I picked up the French horn. And actually, Natasha's sister, and I played together a lot in the orchestra, the French horn. And learning that instrument taught me many things about using the breath, for example. Oftentimes, playing the violin, you don't really have to breathe to play the instrument. You don't use your breath. But you can easily hold your breath for too long when you're playing, which contributes to certain stiffness, right, in the playing, then the sounds also very stiff. But playing the French horn, learning how to control my breath, helped me immensely in how to play the violin. So you have to be very smart about it. You don't want to learn 4 or 5 instruments, but something contrasting. So violin and piano are great 2 instruments. Maybe violin and oud are complementing instruments. Voice is always great to learn. But you don't want to overwhelm, of course. You want to be smart about it and have the time to really invest in what you're learning. But it's always great to be a multi-instrumentalist. Again, you have a lot more work that way too.
Absolutely. Another question also from Karim Ayoub. He's asking, what other music genres you think will be in high demand in the future?
It feels that the musical scene is shifting towards the electronic world so much, meaning music produced by devices and not really natural sounding instruments. I mean, people are making now whole pieces and structures by just buttons on a keyboard, right? Now, that doesn't mean that we have to succumb to that thing. I really think that there's a movement of young generation that are really appreciative of classical music, of the music that basically the song I just sang to you. A lot of people can really relate to that and feel something from it. And this is something that I've been doing. So to the question about social media, in the sense that one must move with the time, with how things are developing, but maintaining a strong identity of who you are and what you perform, so that you're never lost, right? So having a really nice balance between the two.
Yes, that's amazing. So I think, Natasha, do you have another question, or shall I move on to the other topic?
Yeah, I mean, for me, is about music education in the Arab world, especially now. You know, we live in, as we know, and there's a saying in Arabic. The region is على كف عفريت. I don't know how you translate this. Is like on the palm of the,
palm of a demon.
yeah, you're the translator, and people are always worried about, you know, a conflict coming or things are happening, and you coming from Iraq, and you, Zyad, as well, you know, been through many wars and conflicts. So the idea of teaching people music is really not a top priority, and even sometimes in the US,
luxury, some society,
luxury, exactly,
it's a luxury, yeah.
Yeah, and even sometimes in the US, when they do funding cut in public schools, the first thing that is the music. I mean, my kids are fortunate here in our public school that they still take music education, but music education in general is viewed as a luxury, especially in our region where people are worried about survival, a day-to-day survival.
I mean, this is a topic that probably needs to be talked about more extensively. However, I really think that musicians, to the topic of the social activism, that we must view ourselves as diplomats. Why can't politicians be musicians, right? Why can't a musician apply to a political position and try to shift the whole mentality of how funding is prioritized? You think about the arts, right? You said the first thing that is cut is the arts. But during the pandemic, where yes, the arts were cut, imagine being at home, not watching Netflix, no music on the radio, not even having the if you have kids, you can't even show them YouTube videos to get their mind away from what's happening, right? All of these things would not have existed without art. So I think this is the concept, is that we, as artists, we view ourselves as, again, the idea of entertainers, that we are waiting for the other to hire us, for someone more important than us to hire us for something. While we have to flip that in a way, and I always, it's cliche, I go back to education, but we really must instill in the youth the importance of music, so that it is not lost when I think with the old generation now, we have already lost. I mean, there's no way to fight that battle, because it's very in their minds that yes, art is secondary. But with the young generation, if music is really taught in such a way that it is a vital and important tool to be a productive member of society, right? This is the important part. Then we really are building a new environment for this. And to that aspect, the work of the New York Arabic Orchestra is going to be heavily relying on education, using it as a tool in such a way, besides performance, of course. And even more so, I've been doing this work with Carnegie Hall, one of the greatest institutions of music in the world in New York. It's an educational program where I work with instructors from different areas in New York City, but sometimes even in the US, who have musical classrooms that are mostly being taught music from the West, European classical music, but how to include Arabic music to the conversation, create a really diverse and more inclusive environment for that. So, and this happens because in such a diverse society, and when you're taught music that is foreign to you, and again, I understand that now, when you're taught German music, when you are Ethiopian, for example, it has nothing to do with who you are and what you should be expressing, how you should be expressing yourself. But when you have this multi-diversity involved in music teaching, more inclusive environment, then you really have a chance to think, okay, this talks to me, it's about me. And when you eventually grow up and do anything else, you are contributing to society and helping out art becoming a priority in that sense. So again, it's not an easy thing, I think, to be involved in politics. I think musicians are always trying to be the ones who are the most peaceful, the most welcoming, open-minded, and so on. But I really hope that the future to see more artists involved in politics and shifting the whole conversation and really contributing to those laws that usually affect artists first.
Yes. So, Layth, the dialogue, the musical / cultural dialogue between nations of the world, which do you think is more important, in your opinion, to incorporate Arabic music in Western and European music, or just play Arabic music to the European and American audience and perform to them to convey that musical identity of yours to them? Which works better, in your opinion?
I think the latter. The second one is definitely a great step because a lot of the audiences, I mean, even the audiences, you're talking about the Western countries, I would even say even to our own audience in the Arab world, they still need the education to listen and appreciate Arabic music. So we have to also start from the source itself in many ways. But this creating more performance experiences, I think, for audiences is really a great way. It opens the door, at least for them to want to explore more about these things and more online content. So I collaborated a few months ago with a great institution here in Madrid, in Spain, called Casa Árabe, the Arabic House, a cultural institution, and I created 5 videos with them that each one takes a different song from the tradition and different country as well. And I discuss things about it, like the historical aspect of it, the composer, the musical elements in it, in a way to really educate the viewers on what is this music, so that when they come out, because oftentimes you hear, oh, there's an Egyptian band coming to play in our city. You think, I don't know anything about Egyptian music. There's also an element of, like, I don't even know if I'm going to enjoy it, so why even go see it, right? I'd much rather see somebody I know and love.
Yes.
But when you create that sense of curiosity in somebody by allowing them to watch or learn something that's interesting, a little bit of trivia about that style, you open the door to that. And so this is still, that first thing is needed to have more performance experiences for those audiences. And then comes, I think, the next step of integrating it within more musical systems.
Great. I need to remind our audience that this podcast is airing live now on my YouTube channel, Zyad Tariq Rasheed, and my Facebook page and Natasha's Facebook page. It will also be aired. It will also be pre-recorded on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. So please, if you haven't joined into these pages, just hit the subscribe button and the like button, and maybe the bell as well for future notifications. That will be highly appreciated. I think I'm done with my questions. Natasha, do you have anything in mind, please?
I mean, for me, final thoughts to artists, musicians, tips, you went through that journey. Someone is going through that journey and struggling, especially now, as you mentioned, through the pandemic where everything is shut down. Even I think Broadway is still shut down in New York. I don't think they open. So since now everything's shut down, what are your thoughts, words of encouragement? Because as I mentioned, our podcast is a positive podcast. We want to inspire people. We want to, motivate people. So what would you say to someone who's struggling, an artist struggling, especially now during these difficult times?
Yes, we are nice people. We talk to nice people.
I would say our artists specifically go through a lot of ups and downs in their careers. Moments when you are at such a high that you think this is the best thing I ever will do. Other moments when you think I need to quit music right now and do something more productive in my life. It could be peer pressure, family pressure, different reasons. But the one thing that has always kept me going is the community around me. I've always, when I needed something, I would ask for help. And you would be surprised about how open-hearted artists are in helping out, opening doors for others and supporting each other. So if you feel lost, if you feel that you are on the edge, not knowing what to do next, talk to another artist, reach out to somebody, have a conversation with them. You never know when opportunities can happen, and never lose hope, because that moment on stage, and I speak as a performer because I'm a performer at heart, really. That moment on stage when everything is still and it's just you and that melody, there is something so unique and special, ethereal, spiritual, sacred in that moment that cannot be felt anywhere else. And that's a moment when you remember that I'm so thankful to have been chosen to be part of this. So just keep, I guess, keep fighting. It's so rewarding at the end of the tunnel.
Layth, and we are really, really thankful for having you. But I'm greedy and I'm very demanding, maybe. And I would love to hear something more. Please,
Sure.
if you can close the podcast with another live performance, that will be highly appreciated.
Of course, I'll perform to end one of my compositions again called Fawanis, which means lanterns. It's a piece I wrote for my second album with a dear friend of mine. We collaborated together. His name is Rohit Jairaman. He's an American artist who's deeply into, he was born into the South Indian Carnatic musical style. And we collaborated on an album that brought together those two worlds, Carnatic music, South Indian styles, and also certain elements of Arabic music. Of course, not everything, but mostly Iraqi things as well from where I'm from. And we had also an interpretation of Fog al-Nakhal, the great Iraqi folk song. But this is Fawanis. It's a piece, again, that talks about those lanterns, like light that guides you whenever you're lost. So I guess it's a great way to also even answer that last question from Natasha.
Awesome.
Here is Fawanis.
Go ahead.
It starts in the Iraqi rhythmic cycle called Georgina.
Amazing.
Thank you very, very much, Layth. That was a very energetic, powerful, musical, moral boosting podcast. I enjoyed every moment of it. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation.
Thank you
so much for being so amazing and positive in sharing the message of music with us and with the people who watched you. Thank you very much for coming and being our valuable and honorable guest.
Thank you. I appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much, Layth. Thank you so much. That was amazing.
Thank you, Layth.
Great experience. Thank you.
Thank you. And we hope to see you again in future podcasts.
Hope so too.
Goodbye.
Bye. Thank you so much.
ExpaTalk is a podcast run by Natasha Tynes and Zyad Rasheed, two journalists of Arab origin based in North America. The podcast focuses on issues related to Arab affairs and of interest to Arabs across the globe. We interview entrepreneurs, artists, luminaries, and those who are working on exciting endeavors. Join us on this adventure as we talk to those who inspire us and make us think differently about the world. The podcast streams live on YouTube and can be heard on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and SoundCloud.